The third section of your textbook chapter discusses some of the many ways in which the American public is changing. These changes have consequences for American government in terms of representation and demands for government action. This lecture will build upon some of the trends identified in your chapter. Changing demographics have a significant effect on American politics. Demographics are simply the statistical characteristics of human populations. Some examples of demographic measures that are particularly important for politics and government include population size, racial and ethnic composition, age, income, religious beliefs, and regional population shifts. A country's population size has a pretty dramatic effect on its system of representation and government. When the Constitution was ratified, the United States had a population of just a few million. That allowed the framers to structure the House of Representatives to have one representative for every 30,000 people, about the current population of Aiken. Now the United States has a population of over 325 million. If we had kept the original scheme of one representative for every 30,000 people, the House of Representatives today would have over 10,000 members. That's just way too big and unwieldy for a legislative body. So in the early 1900s, the size of the House was fixed at 435 members. Since the size of the House is fixed, that means that as the population grows, each representative has to represent more and more people. Today, each representative is responsible for representing the interests of about 750,000 people, about the number of people who live in the greater CSRA area. So let's think about the implications of this for a second. Why does it matter how many people an individual elected official represents? Well, if that official represents 30,000 people, he or she is likely to have a direct connection to a substantial portion of the people that he or she represents. When I was in graduate school, I studied the campaign of a candidate for office to the Colorado State General Assembly in a district that was about this size, about 30,000 people. Over the course of the campaign, he knocked on every single door in the district, trying to have one-on-one conversations with as many voters as possible. That's the kind of personal style of politics that are possible in a district of that size. Now, when you shift to a district size of 750,000 people, it's much more difficult to establish that level of personal connection between representatives and voters. So instead, campaigns have to rely more on mass marketing strategies for their candidates, and voters have to choose amongst candidates about whom they have very little direct information. This is the root of some of the challenges we face in our political system in current times. The American population has changed constantly with the arrival of immigrants. Immigration to the United States peaked in the first decade of the 1900s, when nearly 9 million people, many from Eastern Europe, entered the country. Today, almost 15% of Americans can be classified as immigrants. In recent years, immigrants from Asia have replaced immigrants from Latin America as the largest source of immigration into the United States. Immigration patterns have led to a significant increase in the racial and ethnic diversity of the American population, a trend that is projected to continue well into the 21st century. The age structure of the American population is also undergoing change. The average age of the population has been increasing for decades. As family sizes have decreased and as life expectancy has increased, the population has gotten considerably older. This impacts government programs like Social Security, in which the incomes of the current generation of workers are used to help fund the retirements of a previous generation of workers. In the early years of the Social Security program, there were about 40 workers per retiree receiving Social Security benefits. Now that number is down to 3 workers per retiree. That has some pretty big ramifications for how Social Security is structured. As generations pass from one to the next, the needs that each generation has from government change. It is projected that sometime next year, millennials will surpass baby boomers as the largest generational cohort in the United States. As millennials start to assert themselves more and more in the political system, their particular concerns are likely to become more prominent on the political agenda. For instance, even though most millennials are now through their college-age years, Many of them have accumulated student loan debts that far exceed the debts taken on by earlier generations of college students. We will likely be hearing much more about this issue in coming years as millennials become an ever larger share of the voting population. While many people still view the United States as a Christian nation, a great variety of religious groups have established roots in the country, and with this growth have come different political and social demands. Both those from non-Christian faiths, as well as those who hold no religious affiliation, are increasing as a share of the U.S. population. These Americans are more likely to be concerned about government restrictions on individual behavior that are based largely on biblical teachings. Population shifts within the United States have important consequences, as some states are growing relatively quickly, while others grow slowly or not at all. The most important ongoing trend over the last few decades has been the shift of the American population from what's sometimes called the Rust Belt in the Northeast and Upper Midwest to the Sun Belt in the South and Far West. The United States conducts a census every 10 years in which the population of each state is counted. After the census, seats in the House of Representatives are reallocated, or what's called reapportioned, based on the new population totals. As you can see from the map in this slide, most of the states projected to gain seats in the House of Representatives after the 2020 census are in the South and West, whereas most of the states that will lose seats are in the North and Midwest. This represents a continuation of a long-standing trend in which southern states, particularly Texas and Florida, have gained much greater influence in Congress. I hope this lecture helped further your understanding of Section 1.3 in your textbook.